My husband left me for a richer woman. Then the truth came out if the person you loved left you because they believed someone wealthier could give them a better life. What would you do? Now, let us see how it unfolded. Marcus Bennett left his wife in the middle of a Manhattan ballroom, with another woman waiting just beyond the glass. Nia Carter Bennett stood beneath the amber spill of crystal chandeliers at the Halcyon Hotel, one hand closed around the stem of an untouched champagne flute, while the Innovation Foundation gala moved around her in polished waves of black tuxedos, silk gowns, and carefully measured laughter. Across the room, Marcus leaned toward Vanessa Cole as a photographer lifted his camera. Marcus, Vanessa, one more. The flash burst white against the mirrored walls. Marcus did not step away from Vanessa. He did not look for Nia. Vanessa's hand rested lightly on his sleeve, practiced enough to seem accidental, intimate enough that Nia felt the meaning before anyone said a word. Her breath slowed. She set the champagne down before the tremor in her fingers could reach the glass. For 6 years, she had known the shape of Marcus's moods by the set of his shoulders, the pressure of his jaw, the way ambition sharpened his voice when something mattered to him. Tonight, as he crossed the ballroom toward her, she recognized something worse than anger. Decision. Can we talk? He asked. Nia followed him through the French doors onto the hotel balcony. November air pressed cold against her bare arms. Below them, midtown traffic crawled between buildings in ribbons of red and white. Through the glass, Vanessa remained near the bar in an ivory gown, speaking to a banker Nia had met twice and forgotten once. Marcus slipped both hands into his pockets. I'm leaving, Nia. For one strange second, she thought he meant the gala. You have another dinner? His face tightened. No, the quartet inside moved into a slower song. Nia heard the scrape of a chair, a burst of distant laughter, the faint rattle of ice in somebody's glass. Marcus looked past her shoulder instead of at her. This hasn't been working for a long time. She did not ask what he meant. Vanessa's reflection hovered in the balcony door behind him. How long? Nia said. Marcus exhaled through his nose. That's not the point. There it was. The old maneuver. Change the question until the answer became unnecessary. Nia slipped one hand into her clutch and touched the smooth, black barrel of her grandmother's fountain pen. She had carried it that evening because she always did when a room made her feel underdressed no matter what she wore. Her phone lit briefly beside it. 2 missed calls. Evelyn Carter, Estate Counsel. She pressed the screen dark without opening them. Is it Vanessa? Marcus finally met her eyes. His silence lasted only a second, but it was enough. She understands the life I'm building, he said. Nia felt the sentence land somewhere beneath her ribs. Not because it was cruel, because he believed it was reasonable. Marcus glanced through the glass toward Vanessa, toward investors, toward the room he had spent years trying to conquer. Vanessa understands ambition. Her family has relationships we've spent years trying to reach. She can open doors. Nia watched him carefully. And I can't. He rubbed the back of his neck, impatient now. I need someone who can stand beside me, Nia, not behind me. The cold seemed to sharpen everything. The city lights, the edges of his face, the absurd precision of the insult. For years she had corrected models after midnight, reviewed pitch decks before board meetings, and disappeared from rooms when Marcus needed to look like the only person carrying the weight. He had asked her to step behind him so often that he had finally mistaken the position for her nature. Nia did not remind him. She only nodded once. Marcus looked relieved. That hurt more than she expected. A minute later, he went back inside. Vanessa turned toward him before he reached the door, and together they disappeared into the glow of the ballroom. Nia remained on the balcony until the cold reached her bones. Then her phone lit again. Evelyn Carter, Estate Counsel. This time she stared at the name. Inside, Marcus was laughing beside the woman he believed could give him a richer future. He had no idea the first call he had just taught. Nia to answer was already waiting in her hand. By the time Nia stepped back into the ballroom, Marcus had already begun rewriting the story of their marriage for anyone willing to listen. The quartet had shifted into something brighter, almost cheerful, and the halcyon chandeliers threw warm light across Vanessa's ivory gown as she stood beside him near the bar, one hand resting on the back of the chair Nia had occupied less than 20 minutes earlier. Nia moved through the room without hurrying. Her bare arms still held the chill from the balcony, and the black fountain pen in her clutch pressed against her palm each time her fingers tightened around it. She had not called Evelyn Carter Estate Council back yet. Not here. Not with Marcus's laugh carrying over the polished marble floor as if nothing had happened. A woman from one of the foundation committees approached first. "Nia," she said softly, touching her elbow with the careful sympathy people used around bad news. "I just heard. I'm so sorry." Nia looked at her. "Heard what?" The woman's expression shifted. Too late. Marcus had told people. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to place Nia where he wanted her. Abandoned, fragile, already behind the curve. "I only meant," she lowered her voice. "Well," Marcus and Vanessa seemed very serious. Nia spared her from finishing. "Enjoy the gala." She walked on. Near the auction display, two men from Bennett Urban's investor circle stopped talking when she passed. One nodded with exaggerated politeness. The other glanced toward Vanessa, then back at Nia with an expression that felt less like cruelty than calculation. Who mattered now? Who did not? Marcus intercepted her before she reached the coat check. "You're leaving?" he asked. "Yes." He lowered his voice. "Don't make this ugly." Nia stared at him for a beat. "I haven't said anything." "Exactly. Keep it that way." He glanced past her, checking whether anyone was close enough to hear. "There's no reason to create drama around the company. Vanessa's family is opening important conversations for us, and I can't have personal issues spilling into business." Nia felt something in her chest go very still. Not heartbreak this time. Recognition. "Personal issues," she repeated. Marcus mistook her tone for surrender. "You'll be fine. The apartment can be handled through the lawyers. We'll work out something fair." Something fair. As if he were already deciding which pieces of their life she would be permitted to keep. "And Bennett Urban?" she asked. He almost smiled. "Nia, that's my company." The words came easily. Too easily. He had forgotten the nights when she sat beside him on the floor of their first apartment, modeling cash flows while he rehearsed pitches to investors who would never know her name. He had forgotten every deck she corrected, every assumption she challenged, every quiet warning he later presented as instinct. Legally, she had never held his founder shares. She knew that. Marcus knew it too. But ownership was not the only thing he had begun confusing with entitlement. Vanessa joined them then, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to Marcus and looked at Nia with a smile polished enough to survive cameras. "I hope there aren't hard feelings." Nia met her eyes. "About what?" Vanessa's smile thinned. "Marcus told me you were never really involved in the business side anyway. So at least this shouldn't affect your work." Marcus said nothing. That silence told Nia more than the sentence. He had not merely left her. He had edited her out. Vanessa lifted Marcus's glass toward the ballroom. "Come on. The Cole Meridian people want to discuss the expansion." She took his arm. Nia watched them turn away, and then she noticed what Vanessa was holding in her other hand. Marcus's black leather presentation folio. The one Nia had organized for years. The one still containing the financial model tabs she had designed and named herself. Vanessa carried it toward the investors as though it belonged naturally at her side. Nia said nothing. She simply watched the folio disappear into the crowd with them, and understood that Marcus had crossed a line far deeper than leaving her for someone richer. He was giving another woman credit for a future built partly on work he had already decided no longer belonged to Nia. 3 mornings after the gala, Nia learned how quickly a marriage could be reduced to passwords, signatures, and permissions. She was standing barefoot in the Tribeca penthouse kitchen, still wearing the black silk robe she had thrown over her sleep clothes, when her phone declined a grocery delivery charge she had made dozens of times before. She tried again. Declined. A minute later, an automated email arrived from the bank notifying her that the household card attached to Marcus's primary account had been suspended. Nia read it twice, not because the language was difficult, but because of how clean it looked. No argument. No raised voice. Just access removed with a click. Before she could decide whether to call him, another message appeared, this one from Bennett Urban's administrative system. Her guest credentials had been deactivated. She had never been an employee, never held founder shares, and never pretended otherwise. But for years Marcus had given her access to calendars, presentations, and certain internal materials because he relied on her judgment. Now the door had been closed without a conversation. By 10 that morning, a courier arrived with a thick envelope from Marcus's attorney. Inside was the first proposed separation agreement, clipped neatly beneath a cover letter instructing her to review it with independent counsel. The document divided their life into categories that felt almost insulting in their precision: residence, accounts, personal property, marital assets, confidentiality, future financial arrangements. Nia sat at the dining table where she had once reviewed Marcus's investor decks and turned the pages slowly. She understood enough finance to recognize what the document was trying to do even without pretending to be a lawyer. It was not a divorce judgment. It was a proposal, and nothing in it became binding merely because Marcus's attorney had typed it onto expensive paper. But the structure was clear. Marcus wanted the transition controlled before emotion, publicity, or valuation questions could complicate it. Near the back, the language describing Bennett Urban caught her attention. Marcus's founder interest was identified as his business holding, subject to whatever legal characterization and valuation the divorce process ultimately required. That distinction mattered. Nia had never owned his shares, but she also knew that 6 years of marriage could not be erased by Marcus saying, "That's my company," in a ballroom. What was separate, what was marital, what had increased in value, and what belonged in disclosure would have to be determined properly. She closed the agreement without signing. Marcus called before noon. "You got the papers?" "I did. My lawyer says they're straightforward." Nia looked at the signature page. "Then your lawyer won't mind if mine reads them." Silence. "Nia, don't turn this into a war. Having counsel is not a war." His voice hardened. "You don't need to start digging through the company. You were never an owner." "I didn't say I was." "Then what exactly are you trying to prove?" Nia glanced toward the black leather folio Marcus had carried for years. It was gone now, taken with the rest of his things, but she could still picture the model tabs inside, the structure she had built long before Vanessa started carrying it into meetings. "Nothing," she said. "I'm asking for the record to be accurate." Marcus exhaled sharply. "Vanessa's family is opening serious doors for us. I cannot have you creating uncertainty around Bennett Urban right now." There it was again. Business first, truth second. After the call, Nia did something small enough that Marcus would never have considered it resistance. She opened her laptop, created a private folder, and saved copies of the bank notice, the access deactivation email, and the unsigned separation agreement. Then she forwarded the agreement to an independent matrimonial attorney with one sentence: "Please verify every asset designation and every financial disclosure before I sign anything." Only after sending it did she notice the unopened voicemail notification still waiting from Evelyn Carter Estate Counsel. Nia rested her fingers on the black fountain pen beside the unsigned papers. Marcus had begun closing doors because he believed all of them belonged to him. Nia had just decided to check the locks. The first person Nia called the next morning was not Marcus. It was the matrimonial attorney whose name she had found through a former Columbia classmate. And by 9:15, she was sitting in a quiet conference room on Madison Avenue with the unsigned separation agreement between them. The lawyer, Rachel Kim, read without dramatics, marking several pages with narrow yellow tabs. "You were right not to sign this yet," she said. Nia kept both hands around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. "Is something wrong with it?" Rachel looked up. "Not necessarily wrong. But Marcus's side is characterizing the assets from their point of view. That is not the same thing as establishing what the final legal treatment will be." She tapped the section describing Bennett Urban. "You do not own his founder shares simply because you were married to him. But we still verify dates, values, compensation, marital accounts, and whatever disclosure is required before you waive anything. We do not accept labels because opposing counsel printed them first." The words did not sound like victory. They sounded better. They sounded like procedure. Nia slid the bank suspension notice across the table. Rachel studied it, then the access deactivation email. "Were company credentials part of your employment?" "I wasn't an employee." "Were you a director?" "No." "Shareholder?" "No." Nia answered each question without embellishment. Rachel nodded. "Then we don't pretend you had rights you didn't have. We document what actually existed." That distinction settled something inside Nia. Marcus had spent years turning blurred boundaries into convenient truths. Rachel was doing the opposite. By noon, Nia had opened a checking account in her own name for current expenses and redirected the income that belonged to her there. No secret transfer. No raid on joint funds. Just a clean line Marcus had not drawn for her. Then, standing outside the bank beneath a gray Manhattan sky, she finally returned the call she had ignored since the gala. Evelyn Carter Estate Counsel. This is Nia Carter Bennett. There was a pause, then a woman's measured voice softened. Ms. Carter, I've been trying to reach you regarding your grandmother's estate. The word grandmother hit harder than Nia expected. She stepped beneath the awning of a pharmacy while pedestrians moved around her. Her grandmother had been gone only weeks, and grief had been buried beneath Marcus, Vanessa, lawyers, canceled cards, and the humiliating logistics of being left. I'm sorry, Nia said. Things have been complicated. I understand. We do need you to come in. Why? Papers shifted on the other end. There are estate documents requiring your review, and you are a named beneficiary. Nia closed her eyes. She had expected perhaps keepsakes, family papers, the fountain pen's matching case, maybe some modest account her grandmother had never discussed. Can you tell me what kind of documents? Not responsibly over the phone. I'd rather walk you through them with the estate file in front of us. Evelyn gave her an appointment for the following afternoon. Nia wrote it down in the margin of her legal pad. When the call ended, another message arrived from Marcus. Please tell your lawyer not to interfere with Bennett Urban. Vanessa's family is helping us move forward, and I need this handled cleanly. Nia read it once and locked the screen. He still believed she was reacting to him. Still believed every move in her life was happening inside the boundaries he had drawn. That evening, she began packing the penthouse. She left Marcus's awards untouched, wrapped her own books, separated personal records, and placed the unsigned agreement in a folder beside the black fountain pen. At the bottom of the estate email Evelyn sent minutes later was one attachment labeled Carter Estate, Beneficiary Acknowledgement. Nia opened only the first page. Her full legal name appeared beneath a single sentence confirming that assets had been designated specifically to her. She did not yet know how much. But for the first time since Marcus walked onto that balcony, Nia was looking at something his name was nowhere on. Marcus received the notice from Nia's attorney before she finished packing the second shelf of books. It was not an accusation, not an emergency motion, not the beginning of the war he had warned her against. It was a routine request that all financial disclosures be verified before any separation agreement was signed, including the valuation and treatment of marital assets connected to Bennett Urban. Yet before that afternoon, Marcus was calling her as if she had walked into his office carrying a match. What exactly are you doing? His voice came through the speaker sharp and controlled. Nia folded another sweater into a cardboard box on the floor of the Tribeca penthouse. Having my lawyer review the agreement. My counsel just told me they can't finalize anything until your side finishes its review. Then they shouldn't finalize anything. A silence followed, dense with his disbelief. Marcus had expected sadness from her, maybe anger, perhaps bargaining. Procedures seemed to offend him more. Vanessa and I have meetings this week, he said. Her family is bringing Cole Meridian into discussions with our investors. I need certainty, Nia. She looked around the apartment. The gray sectional Marcus had chosen, the abstract painting Vanessa once praised at a dinner, the dining table where Nia had spent hundreds of unpaid hours checking numbers he now called his alone. You'll have certainty when the information is accurate. She ended the call before he could turn the sentence into another argument. 2 days later, they met at their attorney's office for the first formal separation conference. Marcus arrived first in a charcoal suit, Vanessa beside him, although she was not part of the legal meeting. She remained in the reception area, scrolling through her phone with one of Bennett Urban's black leather presentation folios resting on her lap. Nia noticed it immediately. The colored index tabs along the edge were still labeled in her handwriting: revenue, runway, expansion, sensitivity. Vanessa looked up and smiled. Marcus said you were making this more complicated than it needed to be. Nia removed her coat. Did he? Vanessa touched the folio as if it were an accessory. He has enough pressure right now. Cole Meridian is trying to help Bennett Urban get to the next level. Nia's gaze rested briefly on the tabs. I hope you read the downside case. Vanessa's smile faded by half an inch. Excuse me. Nothing. Inside the conference room, Rachel Kim placed the proposed agreement beside Nia and calmly explained which disclosures remained under review. Marcus's lawyer responded that they would provide supporting schedules. Marcus leaned back, jaw tight. Can we just get to the signature pages? Rachel did not look at him. Not today. Marcus turned to Nia. You said you didn't want to fight. I don't. Then sign it. Nia placed the black fountain pen beside the document, but did not remove its cap. Not before the numbers are verified. For the first time, the confidence in Marcus's face slipped. It was brief, but Nia saw it. He was not afraid she would take his company. He knew she did not own his founder shares. What unsettled him was simpler. She had stopped accepting his version of what everything was worth. After the meeting, Vanessa was waiting by the elevators with Marcus's folio open across her forearm. A printed page had worked loose from the binder. Nia recognized the layout before she could read the figures. It was one of the old cash runway templates she had built years earlier, updated with current Bennett Urban numbers. Vanessa pushed the page back into place and said, almost casually, "Marcus tells me this model is one of the reasons investors trust him." Nia looked at Marcus. He did not correct her. That was the moment the betrayal widened. He had not merely taken another woman to the rooms Nia once entered beside him. He had begun handing Vanessa the work Nia had built in those rooms, allowing her to believe it had always been his. Nia picked up her coat, slipped the uncapped fountain pen back into her bag, and left the agreement and signed. Marcus watched the elevator doors close with a look she had never seen on him before. Not anger. Uncertainty. 7 years earlier, before the glass offices and investor dinners and magazine profiles, Marcus Bennett had worked from a borrowed desk in a narrow co-working space near Union Square, where the radiator hissed too loudly and the coffee tasted burned by noon. Nia was 22 then, still carrying a Columbia notebook packed with equations in one hand and 2 takeout containers in the other. Marcus had been 36, exhausted, brilliant, and frighteningly certain that Bennett Urban Systems could become something larger than the consulting contracts keeping it alive. "They want a 3-year model by tomorrow," he told her one night, dropping into the chair beside her. "Then give them one," Nia said. Marcus laughed without humor. "I have projections. I don't have a model anyone serious will trust." She opened his laptop. Move. That was how it began. Not with a grand sacrifice, but with small decisions that kept becoming permanent. Nia rebuilt his assumptions line by line while rain streaked the windows and the cleaning crew emptied trash cans around them. She separated recurring revenue from one-time installation fees, recalculated customer acquisition costs, and built a downside case Marcus had not wanted to show because it made the company look vulnerable. "Investors will hate this page," he said. "They'll hate it more if they discover you never thought about it." He stared at her, then smiled. "You scare me sometimes." "Good." At 2 in the morning, he kissed her forehead and called her his secret weapon. Nia believed him. Months later, in their first apartment, Marcus rehearsed a pitch while she sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor with printed slides spread around her. Every few minutes she stopped him. "Too vague. That number doesn't match page 12. Don't say there's no downside. Say you've modeled it." He groaned, rewrote, tried again. The next day, he came home carrying champagne. "They're in." He lifted her off the floor and spun her once, laughing against her hair. "We did it." Nia remembered that word. We. It was the word that made everything afterward seem reasonable. When Marcus needed more time, she took on more of life outside the company. When he needed someone to review a board deck at midnight, she did it without asking for a title. When he began entering rooms where investors wanted one voice and one founder story, she stepped back because she believed visibility was less important than building something together. Marcus started saying, "Nia prefers being behind the scenes." Later it became, "Nia isn't really interested in business." Eventually, at dinners, he said, "Nia doesn't work anymore," with the easy certainty of a man repeating a story long enough to forget he had written it himself. She rarely corrected him, at first because she loved him, then because correcting him in public felt disloyal. Finally, because the distance between the truth and his version of it had grown so wide that she no longer knew how to cross it without detonating the marriage. One night, years into Bennett Urban's rise, Nia found Marcus asleep at the dining table beside a board packet. She covered him with a blanket, then noticed the appendix contained a cash runway framework she recognized instantly. Her structure, her labels, her sensitivity analysis. His name appeared on the presentation cover. She stood there for a long time, then closed the packet and turned off the lamp. She told herself marriage was not a ledger. She told herself love did not require invoices. She told herself she knew what she had contributed, and that should have been enough. Back in the present, sitting across from Evelyn Carter in the estate office, Nia placed the same black fountain pen beside a stack of documents. Evelyn opened the file and slid forward the beneficiary acknowledgement Nia had already seen. Beneath it was a formal estate summary bearing her grandmother's signature from months before her death. Evelyn touched the page gently. Your grandmother was very specific about this, Nia. Anything designated to you was to pass directly to you. Nia looked down at the signature, remembering another promise from years ago, one her grandmother had made when Marcus was still calling her his secret weapon. Never confuse love with surrendering the right to know what is yours. This time, Nia did not look away from the paper. Evelyn Carter did not reveal Nia's inheritance with the flourish of someone unveiling a secret fortune. She turned the estate summary toward her and began with dates. Nia sat across from her in the quiet Manhattan office, the black fountain pen resting beside her right hand, while rain traced thin lines down the windows. Your grandmother owned these assets in her own name, Evelyn said. They were never Marcus's, never Bennett Urban's, and never part of anything you built together. She pointed to the beneficiary designation Nia had seen the day before. The estate plan had existed long before Marcus walked out of the halcyon, but Nia's interest became hers only upon her grandmother's death, after Nia and Marcus had already separated. The distinction was painfully ordinary and, for that reason, solid. The inheritance was not payment for a broken marriage. It was not hidden marital money. It came from a third party directly to Nia, and her attorney had already advised her to keep it in accounts titled only to her and not mix it with household funds. Evelyn turned another page. The net value allocated to you is approximately $24.6 million. Nia did not move. Somewhere in the hall, a copier started and stopped. 24.6 million. She thought of the declined grocery charge. Marcus telling her they would work out something fair. Vanessa carrying Nia's old financial framework into investor meetings as though Nia had never existed. None of those memories changed the number on the page, yet the number changed the shape of the room around them. Did Marcus know? Nia asked. Evelyn considered the question. He knew your grandmother handled her finances independently. I met him once with you, remember? Nia did. For years earlier, her grandmother had invited them to dinner in Baltimore. Marcus had spent half the meal answering emails beneath the table. When Evelyn stopped by with documents for her grandmother, Nia had explained afterward that the papers concerned family investments and estate planning. Marcus had kissed her temple without looking up from his phone. Your grandmother keeps everything locked down like Fort Knox, he had joked. As long as she isn't asking me to manage it. He never asked what she owned. Later, when Nia mentioned that anything her grandmother eventually left her would remain family property in Nia's name, Marcus had waved the conversation away. Fine by me. I'm building my own money. At the time, his indifference had sounded like pride. Sitting in Evelyn's office now, Nia understood it. Differently, Marcus had heard exactly enough to decide the subject was beneath his attention. He was never given authority over these assets, Evelyn continued. And you never authorized him to use them. From here, the important thing is keeping the inheritance clearly separated and properly documented. Nia looked at the account opening instructions attached to the estate package. No magic. No hidden corporate throne. Just assets transferred through an estate, beneficiary records, tax documents, and a paper trail with her name on it. I want everything segregated, she said. No transfers into any account connected to the marriage. Evelyn nodded. That is the cleanest approach. Nia capped the fountain pen without signing anything she had not finished reading. For years, she had mistaken silence for trust, and Marcus had mistaken her trust for absence. Now every page demanded the opposite. Names, dates, ownership, proof. When she left the building, Rachel Kim had already emailed confirmation that Marcus's side had acknowledged the formal separation date in the ongoing case. Nia stopped beneath the awning and read that line twice. Marcus had pushed for the separation quickly because he wanted a clean future with Vanessa. By fixing the date before Nia's grandmother died, he had also created a clear factual boundary between the marriage he was abandoning and the inheritance that arrived afterward. He had been so eager to separate what he considered his future from Nia that he had helped document the moment her next chapter became unmistakably her own. By the time Marcus realized Nia was no longer financially cornered, he had already made a second decision that bound him more tightly to Vanessa than the affair ever had. Nia learned about it indirectly, not through gossip, But while reviewing Bennett Urban's capital structure inside Northstar's glass conference room, the numbers were familiar enough to hurt. Marcus still held the largest individual block of voting stock, but Cole Meridian already controlled 18%, and Vanessa's family had made it clear that any additional capital would come with more influence. The proposal in front of Nia was not a theft, and she refused to romanticize it into one. It was a negotiation. Marcus needed liquidity. Cole Meridian wanted greater protection for its money, stronger board representation, and a larger voice over major corporate decisions if it invested again. Isaiah sat across from her, reading the same pages without watching her face. "You can step away," he said. Nia turned one page. "Because of the conflict? Because it's your former husband's company. Those are different questions." He let the silence sit. Nia had insisted on an independent valuation and outside counsel before Northstar went any further. No favors. No discounted price because she knew where Marcus had made mistakes. No inflated assumptions because she once loved him. If Northstar touched Bennett Urban, every number had to survive people who did not care about the marriage. Across town, Marcus was treating the situation very differently. Vanessa stood near the windows of his Hudson Square office with the same black leather presentation folio tucked under one arm. "My family isn't writing another check, so you can keep operating exactly the way you have been," she said. Marcus's expression hardened. "We discussed support. We discussed an investment." She placed the folio on his desk and opened it to the cash runway section, the framework Nia had built years ago. "There's a difference." Vanessa wanted Cole Meridian's next round to come with more voting leverage and stronger governance rights. Marcus disliked the idea of giving up influence, but he disliked running out of cash more. "Once we get through this quarter, the valuation changes," he said. "Then we can renegotiate from strength." Vanessa studied him. "Assuming someone funds the bridge." Marcus looked toward the skyline. "Someone will." He had heard that a special situations investor called Northstar was reviewing the company, and that Grant Meridian Capital stood behind it. To Marcus, that meant Isaiah Grant. Another powerful man. Another relationship to win. He never imagined Nia anywhere near the decision table. He did, however, know she had stopped behaving like the dependent wife he expected to leave behind. Her lawyer had challenged the first separation draft. She had separated her banking. Estate counsel had entered the picture. Marcus mentioned it to Vanessa that evening with a dismissive shrug. "Her grandmother left her something. Enough that she won't need to fight me over every dollar." Vanessa barely looked up. "Then that should make the divorce easier." Neither of them asked how much. More importantly, neither asked what Nia might do with money once it was under her own control. Back at Northstar, Nia reached the final page of the preliminary review. The company was wounded, not worthless. Its technology still worked. Its customer base still mattered. The balance sheet had become dangerous because Marcus had treated future funding as certainty. "If we walk," Isaiah said, "Cole Meridian may tighten its terms." "I know. And if we stay?" Nia closed the folder marked Lantern. "Then the company gets evaluated on what it actually is." She did not smile. She did not mention Marcus or Vanessa. She simply authorized the team to continue diligence under the independent process already established. Marcus believed the next capital negotiation would prove he still controlled Bennett Urban. Vanessa believed more money would buy her family more control. Nia decided not to interrupt either belief. She would let them carry it all the way to the room where the numbers, the ownership, and the signatures would finally have to speak for themselves. Marcus signed the Northstar term sheet 48 hours before the Innovation Foundation Gala, convinced the hardest part was finally behind him. The Bennett Urban boardroom was almost silent when his attorney slid the signature page across the polished walnut table. The proposed $35 million Series E financing would dilute everyone, including Marcus and Cole Meridian, but it gave the company the liquidity it needed to keep operating and preserved a path forward that the directors could defend. Marcus had argued against the dilution for nearly an hour before the board chair asked the only question that mattered. "Do you have another committed source of capital?" He did not. Vanessa sat 2 seats away, perfectly composed, though Cole Meridian's position would fall sharply after closing. Her family had refused to fund the entire rescue alone, and Northstar's outside counsel had made clear that its economic and governance terms were not open to cosmetic negotiation. Marcus looked again at the signature line. Northstar Special Situations, LLC. He knew the firm was backed in part by Isaiah Grant's organization, and that fact had become the story he preferred. Grant Meridian had money. Isaiah had influence. Marcus understood powerful men. He had spent most of his career learning how to stand close enough to them to appear equally powerful. Once the quarter turns, he said, uncapping his pen, we'll have leverage to revisit all of this. Vanessa glanced at him. After closing, North Star will be the largest voting holder. For now, Marcus signed. The scratch of pen against paper sounded strangely loud. No one forced him. No hidden clause appeared. His counsel had reviewed the financing. The board had discussed the dilution. The risks were written plainly in front of him. Marcus simply believed he could outrun them. Before leaving, he also approved the board materials acknowledging that the company's cash position required immediate outside capital and that prior forecasts had not materialized on schedule. It was the kind of admission he would once have softened with language. This time the numbers left little room. Across town, Nia received confirmation that Bennett Urban had executed the term sheet. She sat at the North Star conference table with the lantern folder closed in front of her. Isaiah read the message beside her. They signed. Nia nodded. Her pulse did not quicken the way she had imagined it might. There was no satisfaction in seeing Marcus cornered by arithmetic. Only clarity. The deal still had closing conditions. Final documents still had to be completed. The board process still had to occur. Nothing about Marcus's future had been decided by revenge. He had simply signed his name beneath the consequences of decisions already made. That evening, the Halcyon Hotel glowed above Manhattan exactly as it had the night Marcus left her. Black cars eased beneath the awning. Cameras flashed. Near the entrance, inside, crystal chandeliers spilled gold over the annual Innovation Foundation Gala, and Marcus moved through the ballroom beside Vanessa as though the last several weeks had proven him right. He told one investor that Bennett Urban had secured institutional backing at exactly the right moment. To another, he described North Star as Grant Meridian's special situations platform, a phrase polished enough to hide the fact that he had never asked who actually controlled it. Vanessa corrected nothing. Near the bar, she carried the familiar black leather folio, its colored tabs still visible along the edge. Marcus raised a glass when someone congratulated him on the rescue financing. We're not being rescued, he said with a smile. We're entering our next phase. Vanessa's hand settled against his arm, and with the right people around him this time. The implication drew a few knowing smiles. Marcus did not stop her. Across the lobby, Nia heard the comment before they saw her. She had arrived alone in a black silk gown, the fountain pen tucked inside her small evening bag. She did not approach them. She did not correct Marcus's version of North Star, Vanessa's version of the past, or the room's assumption that Isaiah Grant was the power behind the transaction. She let each statement remain where it had been placed. Then a senior member of North Star's closing team crossed the ballroom toward her, carrying the same Navy transaction folder she had reviewed for weeks. He stopped beside Nia and held it out. Miss Carter, the final closing package is ready for your review tomorrow morning. Marcus turned at the sound of her name. The man continued, loud enough for those nearest them to hear. Mr. Grant asked me to tell you the table is yours whenever you're ready. Nia took the lantern folder without looking away from Marcus. For the first time that night, his smile disappeared. Marcus did not ask Nia what the lantern folder meant. He walked straight past Vanessa and reached for it. Nia lowered the folder before his hand touched the cover. What is this? He asked. Several people nearby had already stopped pretending not to listen. Tomorrow's closing package. I heard that. Marcus looked toward the North Star representative, then back at Nia. Why are you reviewing it? Before she answered, Isaiah Grant entered the ballroom from the adjoining reception hall, his dark tuxedo almost severe against the Halcyon's gold light. Marcus moved toward him immediately. Isaiah. Good. There's obviously some confusion. Isaiah shook his hand, but did not follow Marcus's attempt to pull him aside. About what? Marcus gestured toward Nia. Your team just handed confidential Bennett Urban closing documents to my wife. Ex-wife? Nia said quietly. Marcus barely heard her. Isaiah looked at the Navy folder in Nia's hands. There's no confusion. Vanessa had joined them now, still carrying Marcus's black leather folio. Then perhaps you can explain why she has it. Isaiah's gaze shifted to Vanessa. Because Nia is North Star's managing partner. Marcus gave a short, disbelieving laugh and looked around as though someone else might correct the sentence. She works for Northstar? She founded it. Marcus stopped moving. Isaiah did not embellish. He opened the closing copy his team member carried and turned to the entity authorization section. Attached behind the financing resolutions was Northstar's certification of authority for the transaction, reflecting the LLC's approved ownership and signing structure. Nia Carter held 62%. Grant Meridian's investment vehicle held 28%. The remaining 10% was reserved for management incentives. The authorization identified Nia as the controlling member and managing partner empowered to approve Northstar's investment in Bennett Urban. Marcus took the pages from Isaiah and read them himself. His thumb dragged down the percentages once, then returned to the top as if repetition might rearrange them. 62. Vanessa stepped closer and read over his shoulder. Her grip loosened on the leather folio. You told me Grant controlled Northstar. Marcus looked at her sharply. That's what everyone said. No, Isaiah replied. That's what you assumed. Marcus flipped to the financing summary. After closing, Northstar would hold 42% of Bennett Urban's voting ownership. His own position would fall to 18.6%. Cole Meridian's would fall to 10.4%. These were not new numbers. They were the same dilution figures his counsel had reviewed before he signed the term sheet. Only the identity behind the largest block had changed in his understanding. You let me sign this without telling me, Marcus said. Nia's voice remained level. Your attorneys knew the investor was Northstar. Your board knew the investor was Northstar. The documents say Northstar. You knew I didn't know it was you. You never asked who controlled the firm. Marcus turned toward Isaiah. This is personal. You can't seriously close a transaction with my ex-wife controlling the other side. Isaiah did not answer for Nia. She opened the lantern folder to the conflict review. That is why Northstar required independent valuation and outside counsel before proceeding. The process was documented before your company accepted the term sheet. Vanessa placed Marcus's folio on a nearby table as though it had suddenly become too heavy to carry. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his attorney. Stop tomorrow's closing. He listened, paced 3 steps away, then stopped. What do you mean? The board already approved the framework. Another pause. His voice dropped. Then call the chair. Nia watched without satisfaction. This was not the moment she had dreamed about during sleepless nights because she had never dreamed about it at all. Marcus had built his certainty from assumptions, and now she was simply watching documentation remove them one by one. His call ended. Before he could make another, an email reached every Bennett Urban director and officer involved in the closing process. Marcus opened it on his phone. Pending completion of the financing and the board's scheduled leadership review, authority to make new financing commitments or represent Bennett Urban in additional capital negotiations required board approval. Marcus read the notice twice. Then he looked toward the investors he had been courting all evening. For the first time since founding Bennett Urban, he could no longer walk into the next financing conversation and assume the company's authority traveled with his name. By 8 the next morning, Marcus was sitting at the Bennett Urban board table without the authority he had carried into that room for years. The Series E closing was scheduled to proceed, and the directors had convened early because the financing restrictions announced the night before could no longer be treated as an abstraction. Nia arrived with Isaiah and Northstar's outside counsel, carrying the navy lantern folder rather than Marcus's old leather folio. No photographers waited outside. No chandeliers softened the light. Here there were only laptops, water glasses, board books, and numbers that had already survived independent review. The company's cash position was presented first. 2 major customer contracts had been delayed. Forecasts Marcus had defended for months had not materialized on schedule. Without the $35 million financing, Bennett Urban's operating room would continue shrinking. Marcus interrupted twice before the board chair stopped him. You will have time to respond. Let the presentation finish. The words landed harder than anything said at the gala. Marcus leaned back and folded his arms. Across the table, Vanessa opened her copy of the post-closing ownership schedule. Northstar, 42% voting ownership. Marcus, 18.6. Cole Meridian, 10.4. She traced the figures with one finger, then looked at him. You told me we would still control the direction of the company. Marcus lowered his voice. I said we'd have influence. You said once my family came in, no one could move around us. That was before the delays. Vanessa closed the packet. No, Marcus. That was before you needed someone else's money more than you needed control. For once, Nia felt no satisfaction hearing Vanessa say it. Vanessa had been cruel, but she had also believed the future Marcus sold her. His company, his momentum, his ability to command every room. Now she was discovering that much of what he had promised depended on lenders, investors, directors, and capital he did not own. The board chair moved to the governance items required around the financing. Until the closing and leadership review were completed, Marcus remained CEO, but his ability to commit Bennett Urban to new financing, issue promises on behalf of the company, or negotiate additional capital without board authorization was suspended. The company's finance team had already been instructed not to process any new extraordinary financing commitments without the required approvals. Marcus pushed his chair back. So I'm CEO in name only? No, the chair said. You are CEO subject to the same governance process this company should have been following all along. Marcus turned toward Nia. And you're comfortable with this? She met his eyes. I'm comfortable with the board knowing what it is approving. He laughed once, without humor. You could kill the deal right now. Everyone at the table understood what he meant. Northstar had leverage. Without its capital, Bennett Urban could be forced into harsher choices. Nia could walk away, let Cole Meridian dictate whatever terms it was willing to offer, and watch Marcus discover exactly how little certainty remained. Isaiah said nothing. He had asked her the same question days earlier in a quieter form. Could she separate the company from the man? Nia looked through the glass wall toward the open office beyond it. Employees were beginning their day. A project manager stood beside a whiteboard. Two engineers argued over something on a screen. Someone carried a cardboard tray of coffees past the conference room without knowing that the people inside were discussing whether the company that paid her would still have room to breathe. 430 employees. Customers with active systems. Families whose mortgages did not care who Marcus had betrayed. Nia rested her hand on the lantern folder. Northstar is not withdrawing, she said. Marcus stared at her. Vanessa did too. We proceed with the financing if the closing conditions are satisfied. The company is worth protecting. She paused, then added, that does not mean every position inside it is. For the first time, Marcus seemed to understand the difference. Nia had enough leverage to punish him by destroying what he built. Instead, she had chosen the harder line. Save Bennett Urban first, and let the board decide what should happen to the man who had mistaken himself for the company. The vote to replace Marcus Bennett as CEO took less than 20 minutes, but the consequences had been building for months. By the time the directors reached the leadership item, the Series E financing had closed, Northstar's $35 million was committed, and the new 7-seat board structure was in effect. Nia sat with the same stillness she had carried into the room that morning, the black fountain pen beside her hand and the lantern folder closed in front of her. The board chair reviewed the findings already discussed: missed forecasts, repeated liquidity warnings, damaged lender confidence, and Marcus's habit of treating future capital as though it were guaranteed. Nothing was introduced that Marcus had not already seen. He argued that Bennett Urban had survived because of his vision. No one disputed that he had built something valuable. The question was whether he was still the right person to lead it. When the vote was called, 6 directors supported replacing him. 1 did not. Marcus remained motionless while the result was entered into the minutes. There was no applause. No dramatic removal by security. He would stay through a short transition period, transfer operating knowledge to the interim leadership team, and surrender the authority to represent Bennett Urban as chief executive once the transition took effect. Vanessa sat several chairs away, no longer carrying his leather presentation folio. Cole Meridian still owned 10.4% after dilution, enough to matter but nowhere near the influence Marcus had once promised her. Her family had made an investment, not a vow of loyalty. She understood that now. When the meeting adjourned, she approached Marcus near the windows. "You told me this company was your future," she said quietly. He looked exhausted. "It still is." Vanessa glanced back toward the boardroom. "No, it's a company you founded. That isn't the same thing." She left without looking at Nia. There was no triumph in the moment, only the clean consequence of 2 people discovering that ambition had never been ownership. Nia remained with the finance and operations teams for the rest of the afternoon. Her first priority was not branding, executive offices, or changing Marcus's name on the lobby wall. North Star's directors approved a stabilization plan focused on preserving payroll, protecting active customer commitments, slowing discretionary expansion, and rebuilding cash discipline. Major spending would require tighter review. Hiring would continue only where operations justified it. Customer projects already under contract would be protected from the turbulence at the top. Isaiah sat beside her through most of the session, but he never spoke over her. When the board asked for North Star's position, he turned toward Nia. Managing partner? She answered. That small gesture carried more weight than any public introduction could have. Near sunset, Marcus found her alone in the conference room gathering her papers. His tie was gone. His suit jacket hung over one arm. For the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man who had run out of rooms to perform in. Was this always what you wanted? He asked. Nia capped the fountain pen. No, then when did I lose it? She looked at him for a long moment. You keep asking when you lost the company. Her voice softened, not with affection, but with certainty. You should be asking when you stopped listening to the people trying to help you keep it. Marcus lowered his eyes. I made a mistake. You made choices. He absorbed that without arguing. Outside, the office lights were coming on one row at a time as employees continued working. Nia looked through the glass and felt the old instinct to protect Marcus rise once. Faint and familiar. This time she let it pass. The next morning, she signed the final transition documents with her grandmother's fountain pen, closed the lantern folder, and carried only her own notebook out of Bennett Urban. Brooklyn was waiting. North Star was waiting. So was a life no longer organized around what Marcus needed from her. The only question left was whether Nia could enter that life without measuring freedom against what she had lost. 3 months later, Bennett Urban Systems no longer felt like a company waiting for the next emergency. The frantic expansion plans had been cut back, cash controls were tighter, and the customer projects that once seemed at risk were moving again on schedule. The company had not become smaller in spirit, only more honest about what it could sustain. Most of the 430 employees never knew how close the business had come to losing its footing. They only knew payroll arrived, teams stopped changing priorities every week, and meetings began ending with decisions instead of promises. Nia saw the difference from a distance. North Star still held the largest voting position, but she refused to make Bennett Urban the center of her life the way Marcus once had. She attended the board meetings she needed to attend, asked hard questions, and left when the work was done. North Star closed another investment that had nothing to do with Marcus, nothing to do with betrayal, nothing to do with proving who had won. That mattered more than she expected. On a cold Friday evening in Brooklyn Heights, Nia stood in her apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. She was moving the following week, not because the place had become too small, but because it had done what she needed it to do. It had held her during the months when everything else was being divided into his and hers, before and after. She pulled open the bottom drawer of her dresser and found the small box she had avoided since leaving Tribeca. Inside was her wedding ring. The diamond caught the light from the window and threw a pale reflection across her palm. For a moment, she remembered the early years, the Union Square co-working space, Marcus asleep over board decks, champagne on the apartment floor after the first investors said yes. She did not force those memories to become ugly just because the marriage had ended badly. They had been real. So had what came after. A knock sounded at the door. Marcus stood in the hallway when she opened it. He looked different without the armor of the CEO title. Not ruined. Not broken. Simply reduced to the size of one man. I was nearby, he said. Nia waited. The transition's done. I know. They offered me an advisory role for a few months. I turned it down. She nodded once. Marcus looked past her at the boxes, then back at her. Are you leaving New York? No, another silence. Vanessa and I ended things. Nia gave no visible reaction. That chapter no longer belonged to her. Marcus glanced down at his hands. I keep thinking about that night at the Halcyon. So do I, she said. I thought I knew what I was choosing. Nia studied him quietly. You did. The words were not cruel. That was what made them final. Marcus swallowed. Was any of it real to you? She looked back toward the open drawer, toward the ring resting in its box, and the black fountain pen beside it. Yes. He seemed surprised. And that's enough? Nia picked up the ring, closed the lid, and placed the box into a moving carton marked private. It has to be. Marcus understood then that there was nothing left to negotiate. He left without asking for another chance. Nia closed the door gently behind him. Later that night, Isaiah texted to ask whether Friday still worked for dinner. She stared at the message for a few seconds, then smiled and typed one word, yes. Outside, the city moved beneath winter light, indifferent to who had been humiliated and who had been vindicated. Nia slipped her grandmother's fountain pen into her coat pocket and stepped into the hallway. Marcus had left her for a richer woman because he believed money was the truth he had finally discovered. By the time the truth came out, Nia had already learned that the fortune he never saw was the life she had reclaimed as her own.